I never thought I'd be standing in the middle of a quiet hotel lobby, feeling like an intruder in someone else's story. My girlfriend had gone upstairs to change for a dinner she insisted we needed, and I was left behind, alone, with her sister, Clara, leaning against the check-in desk like she owned the place. She was in her mid-40s, but it wasn't just her age that made her presence unusual. It was the confidence that radiated from every measured movement, the way she tilted her head and watched, as if she already knew what I was about to say before I did. I told myself it was normal to feel a little nervous around her. After all, she had this sharp, layered presence that made you want to study her, memorize her gestures. The way she brushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear, or how her eyes lingered just a fraction longer than polite conversation required. It was unnerving and magnetic all at once. "I think you've been standing there too long," she said, her voice calm, warm, a touch teasing, and I realized I'd been staring at the sleeve of her blazer for probably too long. I cleared my throat, feeling the heat creeping up my neck. "Yeah, I was just waiting," I muttered, hoping it sounded casual. She gave me a half-smile, the kind that didn't fully commit to kindness or amusement, but hovered somewhere in between. And then she leaned slightly forward, resting her forearms on the polished surface of the desk, and I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume, something soft, floral, almost like lavender pressed into warm skin. I don't know why, but I felt like she had just read the tension in me like an open page. I moved to grab a chair to sit, fumbling a little, and she smirked again. "You don't have to try so hard," she said lightly. "It's just a lobby." I laughed, though it came out more like a breathy exhale. It wasn't funny. I knew that, but there was something in her tone that made the air between us shift, just enough that I noticed how small movements could carry weight. The way her eyes followed mine when I reached for the chair. The slight tilt of her head when she smiled, like she was testing a theory. And for a moment, the lobby wasn't a hotel at all. It was this charged little space suspended in time. Then she did something that made my chest tighten without warning. She picked up a stray pen lying on the desk, turned it over in her fingers, and handed it to me. "Here," she said softly, and it was just a pen, but the touch lingered longer than necessary. I accepted it, my fingers brushing hers ever so slightly, and something unspoken passed between us. A spark, faint and flickering, but enough to make me acutely aware of her presence, aware of every careful breath I was taking. I wanted to look away, to tell myself I was imagining it, but I couldn't. There was a tension there, quiet but undeniable, like the moment before a storm breaks. I caught her gaze again, and she didn't look away. She just held it, and something in the way she looked at me felt personal. When my girlfriend called from upstairs, her voice bright and oblivious, it yanked me back to reality. I nodded, muttered something about meeting her in a few minutes, and watched Clara return to her relaxed stance at the desk. But even as I walked toward the elevator, her small act, the pen, the lingering glance, kept replaying in my mind, like a line of electricity I couldn't touch but couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't plan on seeing Clara again so soon, but there she was, crouched over a stack of folders in the back office of her boutique hotel, a neat crease between her brows. I'd offered to help carry some supplies from the van, mostly because it gave me an excuse to be near her without thinking too much. She didn't look up when I entered, absorbed in whatever inventory she was checking. Her hair was pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping and brushing her cheeks, softening the sharpness of her jawline. There was a quiet elegance in her movements, even in these mundane tasks. I found myself noticing the small things, the way her fingers lingered on a folder as if deciding whether to open it, the subtle line of tension along her shoulders. "You don't have to do that," she said finally, not turning toward me. Her voice had that same calm edge as before, but there was something softer underneath, a faint weariness I hadn't caught the first time. I shrugged, trying for casual. "I've got time." I paused. "And it's not like I'm busy." She exhaled softly, almost like a laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Right," she murmured. There was a hesitation there, a small crack in the confidence she always carried. I felt a little thrill at witnessing it, like catching a glimpse of a side she only let appear when no one was watching. As we worked, I noticed more. The subtle tremor in her hands when she lifted a box too heavy for her frame, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her lips pressed together briefly when she concentrated. It was as if she was always holding something back, even when she smiled politely. I wondered what it was, what weight she carried that I didn't see in the hotel lobby. At one point, she dropped a small stack of papers, and I bent to pick them up. Our hands brushed briefly, accidental and fleeting, but enough to make my chest tighten. She looked up then, caught my gaze for a fraction longer than was necessary, and I saw it, the flash of something private, almost vulnerable, that she quickly masked behind her usual poise. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice lower than before. Her eyes flicked away, but I could tell she felt exposed. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words didn't exist, so I just nodded, letting the silence linger. We continued in tandem, side by side, our movements careful, almost synchronized without intending to be. Every so often, she glanced at me, a micro-expression that hinted at curiosity or maybe hesitation. I caught the way she sighed when a box was too heavy, the small stretch of her shoulders, the gentle way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. When the task was done, we stood still for a moment, the silence charged in a way neither of us broke. She gave a faint smile, quiet, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. And for a heartbeat, I felt like the world had narrowed to that tiny space between us. As I stepped back to leave, she looked at me again, just for a second, and it was enough to make my fingers tingle, my heart quicken. That glance lingered in my mind long after I walked away, and I realized I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not yet, and probably not ever. The rain had started softly, tapping against the windows of the small office where Clara and I were finalizing some paperwork. Outside, the city street was slick and dim, the occasional headlights casting fleeting shadows across the walls. Inside, it was warm and quiet, too quiet. We were crouched side by side on the floor, sorting invoices that had somehow spilled from a drawer. Our knees brushed occasionally, small, accidental contact that made me acutely aware of the space between us. Clara hummed softly, almost unconsciously, and I realized I was holding my breath every time she laughed at her own dry jokes, so low that I had to lean closer to hear. "I can't believe they expect us to do all this paperwork ourselves," she said, eyes still on the stack in front of her. She spoke with her usual calm, measured tone, but I caught the faint edge of frustration, or maybe exhaustion, behind it. I offered a small smile. "They probably think it keeps us busy." Her glance flicked toward me, just for a moment, and I could swear she studied me, as if weighing whether I'd notice her tiredness, her hesitation. Then, just as quickly, she returned to the papers. That brief pause, it lingered in my chest long after it passed. We were both quiet for a few minutes, the only sound the rain and the shuffle of paper. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt heavy, too aware of her presence, too conscious of the forbidden line we shouldn't cross. So I stayed silent, focusing on folding a corner of a receipt, pretending that this tiny act grounded me. And then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and muttered, "It's him." Her ex. I noticed the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers curled around the device before she dismissed it with a soft sigh. It was like an invisible hand had slammed a door between us, reminding me of boundaries I wasn't supposed to test. "Everything okay?" I asked softly, careful not to step too close. She shrugged, eyes downcast. "Yeah, just old news." Her voice was even, but her fingers lingered on the phone for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I sensed the flicker of vulnerability she tried to mask, the split-second openness that vanished as quickly as it came. We returned to sorting the papers, knees brushing again. I could feel the heat from her leg, subtle but undeniable, and for a moment, it was almost too much. Almost. My fingers itched to reach for hers, to bridge the small gap, but the rational part of me, the part that knew she was my girlfriend's sister, kept me rooted in place. She shifted suddenly, her shoulder brushing mine more firmly than before. I inhaled sharply, aware of the electricity in that accidental touch. Her hand trembled slightly as she stacked the last invoice, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might look up, meet my eyes, and say something unspoken. But she didn't. She tucked the papers neatly, stood up, and turned away, leaving me crouched on the floor, chest tight, mind spinning. I stayed there a moment longer, fingers hovering over the invoices we'd just sorted, thinking about that brush of her shoulder, the almost that lingered between us, and how long I might carry it with me before it burned into something more. The hotel lounge was empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel amplified. Clara sat across from me at a small table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, slow and deliberate. I wanted to speak first, to break the tension, but my throat felt heavy, like words were made of stone. She finally looked up, eyes catching mine in that way that made me feel both seen and exposed. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Not playful, not teasing, just that raw, quiet honesty that made the air between us feel electric. I blinked, caught off guard. I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above the hum of the air conditioner. I stopped, because I didn't have a safe way to finish the thought. There was no safe way. She leaned back, letting out a small sigh, eyes not leaving mine. It's like we're pretending this is just ordinary when it isn't." Her hand flexed around the cup, knuckles pale, and I noticed the faint tremor. Subtle, fragile, human. I wanted to reach across the table, touch her hand, reassure her, or myself, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, keeping my fingers on the edge of the table, feeling the distance more than the space itself. "I don't know how to. I don't know what's normal anymore," I whispered. It sounded pathetic, even to me, but it was true. Every time I saw her, felt her near me, something inside me shifted. Something I couldn't name without breaking rules I swore I'd follow. She nodded slowly, eyes darkening with thought. I think that's why it scares me." Her voice wavered, a rare crack in the armor she always carried. She was strong, composed, but in that moment, she wasn't. She was just someone who noticed too much, felt too much, and couldn't untangle it from the rest of her life. We sat in silence after that, letting the unspoken swell between us. The kind of silence that isn't empty. It presses, it weighs, it demands attention. Every small sound became a punctuation. The clink of her spoon against the cup, the faint rustle of the napkin she smoothed out, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. I wanted to say something else, anything, but words felt cheap. Instead, I just kept my gaze on her, memorizing the shape of her jaw, the tilt of her shoulder, the way her eyes darted to the window then back to mine as if seeking answers she knew I couldn't give. Finally, she leaned back, her voice breaking the silence in the quietest way. "I don't think. I can just go back to pretending this is nothing." It wasn't a question. Not exactly. It wasn't even an accusation. But it landed in my chest like a weight I hadn't expected. I swallowed, words failing me entirely. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I only thought, with the kind of clarity that scares you, that some lines, once felt, could never be uncrossed. I was stacking boxes in the back storage room when Clara's voice came from the doorway, low and insistent. "Hey, can you sit for a second?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned. She was holding a small, worn envelope, edges frayed, like it had been carried in a pocket for years. Her eyes didn't meet mine at first. She was staring at the floor, at the carpet fibers, tracing them with an absent-minded finger. "What is it?" I asked softly, stepping closer, but careful not to crowd her. She shrugged, emotion heavy with weight. "It's nothing. Just something I found. From a long time ago." She finally looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed how tired her eyes were. Not physically, but like they carried the weight of memories that weren't hers alone. I took a tentative step closer. "Do you want me to?" "No," she interrupted gently. I need to see if I remember how it felt." Her fingers shook slightly as she unfolded the paper. I stayed quiet, letting her have the space, though my heart was doing something I couldn't name. Her voice came out softer than usual, almost a whisper. "It's from him. the one I lost. Before everything else. She didn't specify who he was, and I didn't ask. I could see the vulnerability she carried in that admission, the raw fracture of her past laid bare, and it made the air between us feel heavier, more fragile. I didn't know, I said carefully, though the words felt clumsy. My mind raced, thinking about all the invisible weight she carried, the memories she didn't share with the world, and the way she could still be here, in front of me, and yet not really present. She smiled faintly, sad but genuine, and tucked the letter against her chest. I thought I'd moved on. I thought it didn't matter anymore. But finding this that brought it all back. Like a quiet wave, just hitting me unexpectedly. I nodded, unsure if I should say more. Instead, I offered the closest thing I had to comfort, my presence. I stayed, standing just behind her, close enough that the heat of my body might have brushed against hers if she leaned back. She didn't. She just exhaled slowly, eyes closed for a second, letting the memory roll through her silently. Then she opened them, and something shifted in the air between us. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a subtle acknowledgement that everything we'd been dancing around had grown heavier, more defined. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "for not saying anything." I only nodded, though inside I was shaking. Because it wasn't the letter itself, or the confession, or the fragile wave of memory. It was the realization that she had allowed me a glimpse of a side no one else saw, and in doing so, had shifted the way I felt about her entirely. I wanted to tell her it was okay. I wanted to hold her, or at least reach out. But I didn't. Instead, I watched her fold the letter carefully, tuck it into her pocket, and turn away, leaving me standing there with the quiet seismic tremor of something I hadn't expected, something I couldn't stop thinking about. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the floor of the small library in the hotel's lounge. Clara was sitting in the armchair, a book open on her lap, though I could tell she hadn't read a word. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, then back to me, as if testing something she didn't dare name. I perched on the edge of the sofa across from her, careful not to make the space feel crowded, though the distance between us had shrunk over the past weeks in ways neither of us had acknowledged. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, fragile but undeniable. "You're quiet today," she said finally, her voice low, soft. Not teasing, not expectant, just present. I exhaled, letting the tension go with it. "I guess. I'm thinking," I said. And the words were true, though inadequate. Thinking about her, about us, about the way every small gesture, every glance, had built this invisible bridge between us. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted in her seat, and our knees brushed, lightly, almost accidentally, and I felt it, the final spark of awareness. Not desire alone, not impulse, just recognition. "I don't know how we got here," she murmured, more to herself than me. Her hands rested on the arms of the chair, fingers flexing slightly. I noticed the tiny tremor again, the one that had shown itself in quiet moments, in the way she let herself be seen when she thought no one was watching. "You mean this?" I said, nodding toward the space between us. "I think we've always been here in a way, just careful about noticing." Her eyes met mine, slow, searching, and I saw it. The acknowledgement of everything we hadn't said, the tension of months distilled into a quiet, fragile truth. There was no rush, no dramatic confession, just the gravity of honesty settling in the room. I shifted slightly, and our hands brushed. A light, tentative contact, and I didn't pull away. She didn't either. We let the connection linger, small and understated, but profound. In that touch, in that shared space, we understood each other without saying it aloud. "I think I can sit with this," she whispered. And it wasn't a declaration of love, not yet. But it was agreement. Acceptance. Recognition. I nodded, and slowly, carefully, I moved closer, letting my hand rest near hers on the arm of the chair. She didn't flinch. She didn't move away. Instead, she let me stay there, quiet, together, in the way that said more than words ever could. For a few minutes, we simply existed in the same room. Sunlight warm on our shoulders. fingers brushing lightly, breath measured, silence, not empty, but full of understanding and mutual decision. And then she closed her book softly, leaned back, and let her eyes drift to the ceiling for a moment. I stayed where I was, content to exist beside her in that fragile, earned peace. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, real, and somehow it was enough. Looking back now, it feels strange how quietly everything shifted. The tension that had hovered between us, sharp and insistent for months, didn't explode into drama. It softened, like sunlight spilling across a room after a storm, subtle but impossible to ignore. I remember the small things most vividly. The way Clara would tilt her head when she was thinking, how her fingers flexed unconsciously when she was nervous, the faint warmth that lingered in the air when we were near each other. Those little moments became the markers of a connection I didn't understand fully at first, but one I came to recognize as undeniable. We never shouted our feelings. We never announced them like headlines. But in quiet gestures, sitting together, letting our hands brush, sharing silence, we learned to acknowledge what had always been there. It wasn't about passion alone, or even desire. It was about understanding, patience, and the willingness to meet each other where we were. I've changed. I've learned to slow down, to observe, to let someone in without trying to fix everything at once. And Clara, she's allowed herself to feel, in ways she hadn't for a long time. To trust not just me, but the quiet spaces between us. Love, I've realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the careful placement of a hand on an armrest, the unspoken agreement to exist alongside someone without needing words, the shared glance that carries a universe of thought. Even now, months later, the memory of her smile, or the faint tremor in her hands when she laughed quietly, lingers with me. I can't stop thinking about the way our story unfolded, the way small choices, small acts, created something that feels both fragile and enduring. We still have boundaries. We still have reality pressing against us, reminding us that life is never perfect, never neat. But what we have, it's ours. Earned. Real. And that's more than I could have asked for when I first stepped into her world, unsure of my place, unsure of the spark I would find in the spaces between words, touches, and silence. If you've stayed with me through this, I hope you can feel it too. The slow burn, the quiet moments, the way human connection can shift everything without a single grand declaration. And if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?